Good morning, everybody, and afternoon. What is it now? Morning. Thank you for coming to watch Gayle and Justine having a conversation. We've just come for what we've labeled a strategic dialogue, but I would say that, frankly, all the dialogue we have with our counterparts in the UK is strategic. We work together on virtually everything in the field from London to Washington, and then on occasions like this. So it's been a very good, very productive discussion at a time where I think, as you all know very well, we're facing both some unprecedented progress and therefore opportunities, but also some unprecedented challenges. And I'd like to open this up, given that we are very fortunate to have Justine here with us, given DFID's leadership around the world, and again, our partnership, to ask you if you might comment, as I think many people know, the UK has a new AIDS strategy. You've put a lot of time and attention into thinking through how the UK wants to proceed in this space, and maybe you could open by sharing some of that with us.
Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. I spent a lot of time back in the UK engaging with all of our civil society, and certainly from our perspective, it's a massively important relationship. And what we tried to do in the UK is, we just literally couldn't do our work without UK civil society, and I think we almost certainly will work with some of the people sat in this room and your organisations. And for what it's worth, I think we should be really proud of the fact that both our countries' strategies on humanitarian support and development go well beyond what our governments are doing, and very much reflect how our two countries and our two peoples feel about the role that we should be playing in the wider world and the constructive role that we can play in helping respond to crises and tackle poverty. And the aid strategy that we launched in November really was the culmination of a steady shift that we've seen within the Department for International Development over the last 3 years or so. And it also responded to some of these challenges that Gayle's talking about, not just ones today around protracted crises, but ones coming down the track on demographics in Africa, etc. And of course the SDGs that had just been agreed in September. So it's about, for us, it was about what can we do more to respond to protracted crisis, what can we do more around stability, looking at how the aid strategy can really draw on issues of prosperity and the positivity, if you like, the opportunities there to work with business. And then finally, we really badged it up strongly in terms of UK national interest and tried to make sure we won this argument about saying there isn't a choice to be made between doing the right thing for some of the poorest countries in the world, the ones facing the greatest challenges and their people, and doing the right thing by ourselves as a country too. We believe that when we do a better job supporting refugees, for example, in Jordan or Lebanon, that's not just good for them, it's not just good for those countries, it's good for us as well. So we don't accept that there is somehow an either-or argument on a successful aid strategy. In fact, our view is that if you have the right strategy, it's absolutely in your national interest as a country doing international development. Some of the things that were really different was a commitment to spend 50% of our resourcing on so-called fragile and conflict states. We think that just simply recognises the reality of where we are today, but we also wanted to very actively say that whilst focusing there, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we need to help countries that are steadily progressing get to where they need to get faster. We don't want to lose that either. I think a second thing that was particularly important for us was this was a cross-UK government aid strategy. So it's not just about what my department is doing, it's about what our foreign office is able to do, it's about what our Department of Health can offer in the context of responding to crises like Ebola. It's about what our Department of Business Innovation and Skills can do in terms of providing heft on driving prosperity. It's about what Treasury can do. For the last 3 years, we've had a joint unit set up with our HMRC, which is our tax revenue authority in the UK, where some of our lead officials are going out helping tax authorities in places like Pakistan to do smart tax. so that they can have straightforward, transparent, but smart tax systems that can really help grow their economies rather than be a dampener on them. So it was about saying we want a joined up approach across the UK government, and actually we're going to be a government that has a whole of government approach to aid rather than a compartmentalised one that just has one department looking at it. This is all our responsibility, and it's really been a culture shift, I think, over the last few years, but a very, very welcome one.
Thank you. We've gone through a little bit of a parallel experience with that. I think many of you know what we used to refer to as the spaghetti bowl chart. This was a picture of, or a diagram of all the US government departments and agencies that had a piece of the development or humanitarian puzzle or a stake in the outcome. And I think what we have tried to do is bring all of those agencies together in the best way possible, so that whether it's Empower Africa or some other initiative, rather than stovepiping, or we like to refer to them as cylinders of excellence, just so as not to be pejorative, we can ask ourselves, if our mission is X, in that case doubling access to electricity, how can we marshal all the resources, skills, and capabilities we have across the government? Let me ask you another question as you do this, and this is something that I think we touched on in the meeting we just had, but is a challenge I think we both face. Together, we are the biggest. We are the two agencies that are out there most often the fastest and the most comprehensively, at a time when demand is great. We've looked a lot at how we can mobilize more private sector capital and other things we can do. How do you think of that in the UK, and what do you think we all need to do as we look out at the number, not just of crises, but the opportunities, even inherent in, as you say, putting 50% of your resources in fragile or conflict states? These are states we can move forward. But how do you, from the UK, look at the challenge of there being more opportunity and more crises out there than the two of us alone can go after? What do we need to do to maximize our impact and get others to join?
I think the first thing is there's a reality check here, which is if you look at financial flows into the developing countries around the world, they really dwarf ODA. So another shift that we've been on is working more effectively with business. And I know that traditionally, in many respects, the focus has been on the risks of bad investment. And that's quite appropriate, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But actually, there's equally a huge opportunity on development if we can shape those financial flows and that investment, and indeed the growth that's happening in the private sector in many countries. If we can shape that so it really does generate sustainable growth that is providing jobs for the maximum number of people, productivity in agriculture can be hugely powerful on food security. But we're not going to realize all of those opportunities if we just have a sector that says, also, well, we don't engage with business. So the big challenge we set ourselves is, how can we make this not just work to manage some of the risks, but how can we make this a race to the top, where companies that are doing a great job on development and really showing the way, how can we make sure that they get the benefit of that? So we've started working with memorandums of understanding with companies where we really feel like there's a coinciding of our values. And it's taken us some time in a way, because we didn't have a history of working hand in hand with business. So we've had to, in a way, learn how we do it best. But we are, and I think the Addis meeting that we had last year in Ethiopia was a real landmark. If you'd had that conference 5 years before, you'd never have had the private sector there. You'd never have had the big focus on domestic resource mobilization. But my encouragement, certainly in the UK, to civil society is, let's shape this. If any country, I think the UK can do this as well as anyone. I think the US can do this as well as anyone. We've got strong corporate governance. So let's take the responsibility for trying to work with business effectively, and let's show how you do this. And for many of the countries we work in, they're really keen to see what a different offer from business might look like. So they want a different offer that's not just about a transactional relationship. And we should help our corporate sectors get there more effectively. And we should be working on the ground, helping entrepreneurship and helping access to capital. The last point I'd make on this is innovation. I mean, you know, we're all wearing clothes, the private sector's, you know, you'll be all tweeting out, no doubt, on iPhones that the private sector innovated. Innovation is something that the private sector, it's the bread and butter. If we can get just a little bit of that amazing thinking on some of the toughest, most difficult development challenges we've got that require a technology fix, we could really start to get somewhere. So those relationships have never been more important for us, and I think they really can start to be that missing ingredient that means we can fast track development over the next 15 years with the SDGs.
I'm for fast tracking over the next 15 years. I'm sure everybody in the room is. And to your point on innovation, one of the things that's been interesting at USAID is the addition of the Global Development Lab, which has allowed for incentivizing creative and putting into the field technology, but also working with the private sector on what are some creative means of financing. I think the other thing that the US and the UK can do very effectively as innovation and technologies come to the fore is figure out how we can scale. Because between us, we are major donors to every pipeline and every multilateral institution that exists. We work with jointly, literally hundreds of NGOs and partners on the ground in government. So I think that's the other thing that I hope we'll see over the next 10 or 15 years is an ability to scale some of these innovations beyond where we've been able to take them today. Now, I know you have something coming fairly soon, which is a high-level summit on anti-corruption. And if we're going to talk about what are other ways we can mobilize the resources we need to get to success on the SDGs, or to generate the kind of capital, domestic resources is something you've mentioned. Getting on top of corruption is key. I think this is an audience that is very focused on the issues and the plague of corruption. Maybe you could say a little bit about your upcoming summit.
Thank you. I think one of the things we have tried to do as a government is just generally run towards some of those issues that are very difficult, very challenging, but actually really important to get fixed. In development, we held the Girls Summit in 2014 that was looking at FGM, child marriage, that really, you know, had felt quite difficult to talk about, but it turns out they're critical for enabling us to keep girls in school. And dare I say, a similar approach, which is there's a bit of it for the UK about getting our own house in order. So we have girls who go through FGM, we have issues on forced marriage, and so it was a way of us actually challenging ourselves, and similarly with anti-corruption. This is like a leaky bucket that we're putting money in, and we know that the money seeps out. So we passed the Bribery Act. That was one of the first things we did as a government when we came into power in 2005, but everybody knows the challenges historically we've had with overseas territories. You know, we've seen with the Panama Papers, the fact that yes, there's perfectly legitimate business going on, but there's also a lot that's not legitimate. And we don't really want to turn a blind eye to that anymore. We put it on our agenda when we were hosting the G8 in 2013. The agenda was basically 3 T's, tax, trade, and transparency. We had got on the case with putting together agreements on registers of beneficial ownership. We've agreed to do ours publicly as a country. We'll be one of, I think, literally only 4 or 5 countries that do a public version of this register. But the point is, we want to keep that momentum. And although this is exceptionally hard to do, because we can't do it on our own, we have to get international agreement, we have to work with businesses, etc., we just want to keep pushing on. And so the anti-corruption conference was the next phase of that work. And we hope that if one thing the Panama Papers have done, it's shown why we need to put this on the agenda and take some next steps on it. We want more progress on beneficial ownership. We want more progress on illicit transfers. We want more progress in countries on domestic resource mobilization and tax strengthening and tax transparency. So we hope that working alongside countries like the US, we can really start to keep the momentum going, and we need to do that. Otherwise, these issues are a dead weight on development from my perspective. And my last comment before I shut up is it's like a reverse welfare. It's a reverse welfare system. I mean, it's literally taking money from the poorest people and putting it in the pockets of the richest. I mean, it's the antithesis of what we're trying to achieve. So that's why it's on our agenda, and it comes with a whole load of thorny issues, but we're up for trying to fix them.
I think tackling thorny issues is part of what we're supposed to do. The U.S. will participate at a high level in the summit. And one of the things we were just talking about, one of the reasons we're looking forward to it, it does elevate an issue which is difficult to talk about, but I certainly have found everywhere I travel, in my engagements with you all, with governments, with multilateral partners, it's an issue in every conversation we have. So I think, difficult as it may be, I think the majority is swinging towards the need to and the importance of having a conversation and making the tough decisions. The other thing is that I think collectively, the world has done a fair amount on this, so there's a strong foundation on which to build. I'm not sure it's a foundation that is as visible as it might be, whether it is, the open government partnership is not a sum total solution, but it's a huge contribution when you think of the fact that to join that, governments have to publish their budgets. They work with civil society to come up with the means by which they can govern openly. If you look at what's been done at the formerly known as the G8, now known as the G7, through the summit Justine mentioned, or through the G20, with all G20 members agreeing to get to the point where we are setting the bar with regard to norms and standards. The work that's been done on transparency, fiscal transparency. I think if we can use the summit as a way to make more evident that this foundation is there, make more evident the high cost of failure, and then push the ball forward on where we need to get collectively on corruption. My sense is we've got a huge and enthusiastic audience in the developing world, certainly from civil society, but I think also from a growing number of governments. So I think this is destined to be successful, and I hope you all will work with us to give it visibility and to elevate the things that we are collectively doing that are having some impact, but to also create the demand signals for what more we all need to collectively do. Summitry, from summit to summit to summit. We also have upcoming the World Humanitarian Summit, which I will be talking with you all about this more during your own meeting. Clearly, it's a high priority for everyone here when you look at the sheer number of crises we're collectively responding to, the number of those that are protracted, the cost of that in human life and suffering and lost opportunity costs for development, and also in dollar terms. We've talked a bit about the summit and how we can join forces to make it as impactful as it might be, but Justine, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about if you had it entirely your way. What would you really like to see come out of the summit? And what are the messages you think are most important for the world to hear out of that at this particular moment in history?
Well, so I'll have my say, and then it would be really interesting to hear from your perspective. Yep. So for us, it would be taking everything we learned from the Syria conference in London on how you work constructively with a country like Jordan or Lebanon in terms of what they can do, which means that we can help more, and saying, right, how do you do that more internationally? I think it would be particularly saying, what are the next steps on education in crisis? So we were talking about the fact that there are 37 million children who aren't in school at the moment, not because of anything other than the fact that they're caught up in a refugee situation, or they're caught up in some kind of crisis situation, and that is just storing up problems for the future. And there's only, in my opinion, one thing more expensive than investing in education, and that's not investing in education. So I would like to see the next steps on the Syria conference on jobs and livelihoods and education. I would like to see us really start to hard code improving how we support particularly women and girls in crisis. We know that they're even more vulnerable than normal when caught up in an emergency. And the last piece is on international humanitarian law. It's great having a better approach on responding to humanitarian situations, but that only applies to people that we can get to. And we've seen huge problems, particularly brought to light in the Syria conference, that there's a big issue on access, there's a big issue still on non-adherence to perhaps one rule that I think everyone should be able to agree. Whatever you think the solution to Syria is, the one thing we should be able to find agreement on is accessing support to people who need it. And we want that on the agenda too, a reaffirmation that these international humanitarian laws are there for a reason, they matter, they should be adhered to, and we should be better tracking that adherence and non-adherence when it happens. We shouldn't just accept the situation we find ourselves in. Having said that, those laws are incredibly powerful, and they are overwhelmingly helping us get to a lot of people at the same time, and we shouldn't lose sight of that either. So those are my priorities, Gayle. What would you say yours are?
What are mine? Well, since we just had a strategic dialogue, no, I think we agree on those, and
oh, there's
but
one
let me
other,
go,
isn't there, that the UN bit, they've got to work smarter.
yes, the UN system working smarter. And I think we're in agreement on all of those things. I think something else we're in agreement on, although we tried in our recent discussions to focus on the tangible, actionable things we want to be working on together. I think at a slightly higher level, I hope the World Humanitarian Summit will do a few things. One is I hope it will send a signal to the world and educate the world to the fact that at a time, again, of more and more dangerous protracted crises than have we seen all at one time in a span of a few years. I mean, it's only a few wars, an Ebola epidemic. I mean, it's truly unprecedented. That the international humanitarian community has done phenomenal work to respond, adapt, and manage tremendous risk with huge loss of life. So I think an awareness of that. I think some of the things that we just discussed where we're in total agreement, the need for education in crisis, for working smarter, a lot of the discussion that's been out there about humanitarian and development. It's not quite the relief to development continuum. When this first came up, I reminded people have been talking about that for 40 years. But I think it's a little bit more of how do we take a development perspective in some of these humanitarian crises. I hope the summit will be an opportunity to send a message from that side of the house, which quite frankly picks up the pieces, that we need to make bigger and bolder investments to get to the SDGs. Because your reference, including to DFID's decision to spend 50% of your resources on fragile and conflict states, if we are investing more development dollars in the education, in the rights and opportunity for girls and women, in food security, in all of these things, governance, democratic systems, and so on and so forth, we all know we'll have to spend less over here. So I think if we can find some ways to connect those dots, and even as we're looking to adapt a humanitarian system that was built a bit more for natural disasters than what we face now, to be effective in the face of what we're looking at now, I hope the summit will give a very strong message again to the other side of the house that while we appeal for donors to do more on the humanitarian side, we've also got to up our game on the development side, because if we're successful on the SDGs, which is going to take a lot of effort, we're going to reduce the kind of demand we see on the side of the World Humanitarian Summit. Maybe, and I realize we have a limited amount of time, we do have a room filled with civil society and NGOs. It'd be interesting to hear a bit from you, and I'm more than happy to share my views as well about how DFID works with your NGO community and some of the opportunities that you see there going forward.
So much of our work is done through NGOs. I mean, we literally wouldn't be able to deliver our aid strategy without that element. A lot of them are British NGOs. They're not exclusively British, though. And we've just got this amazing footprint in Britain of humanitarian response, and it goes beyond the civil society. So when we were responding to Ebola, our NHS people were out there. It's just remarkable. Anyway, the shift we've had is we've tried to broaden out our relationship, and we've tried to make it more strategic, and we've had a focus on value for money. How have we done that? We've got a couple of mechanisms, if you like. One's called Aid Direct, where we have funding rounds that pretty much any charity can apply for, and we've really tried to target this at almost the SME sector. So I think traditionally a lot of our work is and will stay through some of the biggest NGOs in the world. But at the same time, what I wanted the department to do, and I wanted us to do with the aid strategy, I wanted us to nurture the next wave, if you like. So development's changing. We've got some amazing NGOs that do more livelihoods work. We've got some incredible ones that are doing quite technology-based development. We wanted to sort of stimulate, the Save the Children's of the future. Who are these ones coming through? So more of a focus on SMEs. And the other thing we've done, which has worked really well, is not just Aid Direct, but Aid Match, where we have essentially a program where if you're running a campaign, you can apply to have it aid matched by the UK government. So we'll match £1 that somebody in the UK public's given to a campaign with £1 from the Department for International Development. And it's a great way of just very, very basically matching the public's priorities on development with ours. So we'll follow their money, but it's also a really good way of reaching out to some different groups of people interested in development than we otherwise would have done, and we ask for the sort of publicity plans so that we can try and really get out to some different audiences. Some of them are faith-based, but actually a lot of them are just pretty often local campaigns that people are running, and I'm smiling because there was one that's this brilliant charity based near Glasgow called Mary's Meals, and they do a fantastic job on nutrition. Some of you may have heard of them. Anyway, we did this aid match with them where they thought that they probably raised about £1 or £2 million, and it was phenomenally successful, and they actually raised about £5 million, and then we suddenly had to aid match £5 million. So we ended up with a much bigger program, but for all the right reasons, and it's sort of stimulating people's interest, and actually it makes them want to contribute their money because they know it's going to get doubled up.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think it's something, we were talking at the top of our bilateral discussion about how do we make the case domestically in each of our countries for what it is we're doing, and one of the things you're just describing this with Mary's Meals, but I think I came back. One of the things that you all have enabled us to do here, and something we've tried to be better at, is explaining to the American people that the US government provides assistance, but so do the American people. And I think it's a hugely important message, whether it's been when you all have aggregated your commitments in response to Haiti or Syria or food security or other things, or just the work I do regularly with Sam to say what's the level of giving among the American people now. Because when I'm talking to a member of Congress or I'm talking to an American public audience, as you just demonstrated, Justine, and I can say, well, actually the American people are putting their own money in, even at times of financial hardship. When we've seen dips in the economy, those levels remain high. It's hugely, hugely important, and I think we make a better joint case. Someone just very politely held up one of those signs that said we only have a few minutes. And so I want to close with something that Justine takes us to a conversation we had when we first talked about having this strategic dialogue, which is how can we be helpful to each other? Again, DFID is hugely popular in the UK. It's earned a very strong reputation. It's a player. Aid is stronger than I think it has ever been. I think we are riding the crest of a very important bipartisan consensus, but I think we both know that we've constantly got to prove to our taxpayers, the media, and the public that this is a viable enterprise. And so I would like to close by articulating what I suspect is a message from all of us to you in the UK in a way that I hope will be helpful as you make the case back home in London and elsewhere about what you're doing. And that is to thank and congratulate the UK and DFID for elevating development as you have. It's sent a huge signal around the world. It's been very helpful to us in our effort to do the same. But also to offer a huge round of applause for point 7 and your commitment to providing the resources and leadership to make the world a better place. So thank you.
Well, just to respond to that, thank you very much. We've always tried to be a country that has taken the world's priorities and made them as to try and constructively fix. And we've done the 0.7% commitment at a really difficult time when we've been, getting our own public finances in order. But I come back to my original point. We've done that because we don't think that in the long term we can be successful unless we rise to the challenge with others in terms of tackling some of these really intractable problems. And we haven't really talked about women and girls too much, but we don't think, for example, countries are ever going to sustainably develop if half the population's locked out of that. These are really big issues for the world that need to be resolved if we're going to have we're going to be on a path that's successful for the future. So it matters to us. I think we should all be out there making the case. In today's world, ironically, there are always these forces that encourage people to look inward to the challenges that their own countries face domestically, and that's really understandable. And it's important that countries sort out domestic issues, but at the same time, we've never been less insulated from what's happening around the rest of the world. And I didn't have a plan to go into politics. I'm a finance person, but the reason I did is because I just think people make the difference. And it's all of us taking our individual decisions about what we can personally do to make things better more broadly, that in the end add up to collectively ensuring that happens. And not leaving it to other people, both as individuals and as a country, I think is what marks both of our countries out, that we should be really proud of. But we also have to sort of say, well, looking ahead to the 21st century, what's our role now? And how does that change? And for me, the work that we're all involved in and the role that development plays in the right answer to some of these thorny issues around migration, et cetera, counter-terrorism, et cetera, it's about having fundamentally better futures for people to be able to look forward to, so that they can have the kinds of lives and lifestyles that we all aspire to in the countries that we were lucky enough to be able to be born and grow up in. So that's why this agenda matters, because actually when people sort of say, well, what are the resolutions to some of these most challenging questions, the answer is a positive one, and it's about development. And it's about getting countries down that path as fast as possible, so that the people who live in them actually can have the kinds of futures that mean, not only is it good for them, it's going to be better for all of us and for all of our children. So that's why what we do matters. I just wanted to finish off by saying a big thank you to all of you for the work that you do and for the support that you then provide back to the work that our governments are doing in this area. It's absolutely critical, and it makes a huge difference. So thank you.